The best time to prune your fruit trees is winter, correct? Well, yes, but is that the only time you should prune? Probably not. There is a case for pruning your fruit trees in summer as well as winter, and it all depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. We're going to get into why you might want to do some summer pruning as well as exactly how to go about it. I only started summer pruning in recent years, and that's mostly because my fruit trees were really young and I didn't want to mess with them too much. So I had a few years to sort of just observe how they grow, and what I learned is that they do just fine without summer pruning. They really do. I've had good crops, I've been happy with how they're growing. But a couple other things I noticed is that certain trees, especially because of my warm climate, I have a really long growing season. The trees will grow until late November, really. And so I've noticed that certain trees just grow like crazy. They get so big, they get leggy and sort of crowded, no matter what kind of winter pruning I do. That just hasn't been enough. And so that is what led me to start doing just a little bit of a summer trim. And that's really what summer pruning is for. It's that little bit of finishing work on the work that you did over the winter. I read somewhere that it compared it to winter pruning if you're building a house. It's sort of like laying the foundation, the framing, the electrical and plumbing, all of those essentials that you absolutely need in a home. But then summer pruning is sort of the finishing work. It's floors and paint and tiling and lighting and all of that kind of stuff. And both are really essential elements. In summer pruning, what you're really trying to accomplish is keeping the size and growth in check. And that's a big difference between winter pruning and summer pruning. In winter, the tree is dormant. It has stored up all of the energy it needs to grow come spring in the root system and in the trunk. So when you cut back on the dormant growth, the tree hasn't lost any of that energy. In fact, it has more energy in proportion to the size of the tree. So once growth begins, the tree will kick into high gear. The more you prune over winter, the more it's going to grow in spring, and that can be really useful. So in winter, you prune to influence how the tree grows. In summer, it's different because the tree is green, right? It has leaves. So when you remove green leafy growth during the growing season, you're limiting how much photosynthesis can happen. You're limiting how much energy the tree can take in, which actually limits growth. It reduces growth. So you can use summer pruning as a tool to help you keep the size of the tree in check, to help you encourage stronger growth of kind of whippy and leggy branches. It can certainly help you get rid of anything that's damaged or problematic. But that's the general difference between winter and summer. Winter pruning encourages growth, summer pruning limits growth. Now, with all that in mind, a little word of caution for you. In winter, you can prune essentially as much as you need to because the tree is dormant, it's asleep, it's hibernating, it's not going to stress it out to prune as much as you need to. In the summer, it's different. The tree is still actively growing, even if it's slowed down a little bit at the end of the season. And so you want to be cautious how much you're doing. So with summer pruning, less is more. You definitely want to do the minimum that you need to do to accomplish what you want to accomplish. So just be really careful there. For the rest of this video, I'm going to be going around to different fruit trees in my garden, and I'll talk about exactly how and why I'm going to prune each of them this time of year in summer. And that includes a few specific things for specific types of trees. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And what this is going to do is increase light flow and airflow throughout the trees. It's going to help me keep the size and vigor in check for the rest of the growing season. And it could even potentially lead to more fruiting wood for next season. Although there is some debate about that among the experts, but a little bit more about that later. Let's go ahead and get started over by my peach trees. So let's talk about exactly when you want to do your summer pruning, because if you do it too soon in the summer, then the tree is still growing more actively, and that's going to cause that more vigorous type of regrowth to happen, and that's not going to accomplish what you want it to. But if you wait for too late in the season, closer to early fall, there's a good chance, at least in some climates, that the pruning wounds won't be able to heal fully before the cold weather sets in, and that can lead to diseases. It can lead to dieback of the tree or other winter injury. So you want to try to time it just right in the middle of the summer. In most places, that's going to be July to August. And so what you're looking for is look at the branches on the tree, look at this year's new growth, and you're wanting to wait until the tree is about 3/4 of the way done growing for the season. So how do you check that? Well, you look at the new shoots for the season, and if you see at the end, like on this branch here, at the end that the leaves are fully mature and they're not that bright light green of new growth, then that's how you know this branch is just about done for the season. As opposed to other parts of the tree, which I'll show you a little bit closer up, you can see that bright green new growth happening. So you want to wait until about 3/4, give or take, of the branches on the tree are finished, have those mature terminal leaves, as opposed to the lighter green new leaves. Now in my climate, this is now the end of June. I'm doing this a little bit early according to some climates, partially because I'm seeing that my tree is at the right time. The tree is starting to slow down a little bit, and that's what happens in a lot of warmer climates. I essentially have 2 growing seasons, so the bulk of the growth happens in spring and early summer, and then as the weather starts to heat up and creeps up toward those triple digits that we get every year, the tree stops. It stops growing, kind of like in the dead of winter. It's conserving its energy. It's not wanting to be stressed out. So I know that my tree is slowing down for that heat of the summer. But then come the milder temperatures of early fall, I have another 3 months of growth to happen. So I'm trying to time it just right. And by pruning now, hopefully that fall growth won't be quite as vigorous and I can keep my tree's size in check. Peach and nectarine trees, as well as a lot of other stone fruit trees, are some of the worst culprits in having really vigorous growth in warm climates. So these are going to be the trees that need the most work from me this time of year, even though I'm going to be very careful not to overdo it. Now, they have already fruited. I've already harvested all the peaches off of this tree. Generally, that's what you want to do. You want to wait until after the fruiting season. Now, you can prune while there's still fruit on the tree. If you want to just increase the light exposure to the fruit, that can be a good time to thin out just a little bit. That's just fine. I find that I don't need to do that because the sun is so intense here. So I wait until after fruiting to do my summer pruning. So here are the steps that I'm going to take. The first thing that I'm going to look for is any sort of damaged or diseased growth, particularly growth that has been damaged because maybe it was a heavy fruit load and a branch has broken partially off. Those things can be a magnet for pests and disease to come in through the rest of the season. So I want to have a clean cut. I want those to be able to heal really nicely. The next thing I'm going to look for is any places where there are like really badly crossing branches or just really crowded growth, especially if you notice those thin vertical water shoots that tend not to be fruiting shoots. They can just kind of messy up your tree and make it really crowded and dense and can cause airflow problems. So I'm going to get rid of things like that. And then finally, I'm going to be taking some of the longer shoots and shortening them by a few inches. Sometimes maybe more than a few inches, because a lot of the new growth, if I can look at one of these newer shoots, and it's 4 or 5 plus feet long, and they're really long and leggy, and they may fruit next year. They probably will, but those are the branches that are really likely to break because they just can't support the fruit. So by tipping them this time of year, again, like I mentioned earlier, it's not going to regrow a lot this season, and that's going to encourage that branch to grow a little thicker and a little stronger, which is going to be better for my fruit next season. Now, again, I don't want to take off too much, so I'm going to be really careful and choose just the longest branches that are just leggy and kind of going everywhere. And that's also how I'm going to help limit the height of the tree just a little bit. And this is just your friendly reminder to always sanitize your pruning shears before you start pruning. And I'm also going to be sanitizing between each tree that I do because I don't want to have any chance of disease spreading between my trees. And these pruners, I've also recently changed the blades so they're nice and sharp. You can see where the new growth started this year. at a place like this, where this year's growth is going to be a lighter green color, it's going to be a softer branch, and then last year's growth is going to be nice and strong and woody. So it's pretty obvious where the new growth started. And you can see just how long this shoot is. So basically, when you're tipping these branches, if they're not too long, you really only need to trim them by a few inches. But since this one is so long, I'm going to go back a bit, maybe about halfway. And you want to pay attention to where these leaf buds are, because wherever you trim, that's where regrowth is going to start, and that's the direction that a new branch is going to come. This is my plum tree. It's a Santa Rosa plum, and its pruning needs are really similar to the peach trees. So peaches, nectarines, plums, all very similar. All of the stone fruits seem to really benefit from summer pruning, and in a minute I'll get to apricots and cherries because their needs are slightly different. But for this tree, what I've noticed is that, and I'll show you, that it just tends to grow really long, thin, leggy branches for me. So the main thing I'll be concentrating on is tipping those branches, heading them off just a little bit so that hopefully they'll grow stronger and thicker throughout the rest of the season. And other than that, it's the same thing, getting rid of water shoots, anything that's crossing too much, or just anything unnecessary or damaged. Okay, it's already getting hot and it's only 7:30 in the morning. Now I'm headed to the front yard where my apricot tree is. Now, a lot of people recommend pruning apricot trees and cherry trees only in the summer after they've fruited. And the reason for that is they can be really susceptible to fungal diseases like silver leaf in the prolonged wet weather of spring in most places. So pruning in the summer is not only a good idea, but pretty much essential for these trees. Now, if I still need to prune in the winter, if I take a look at my dormant tree and I think it needs some shaping, I will. But you want to look for a stretch of weather over the winter that has as little precipitation as possible, preferably close to 6 weeks with very little wetness to minimize the chance of diseases happening. But right now, I'm going to do my summer pruning, and I'm going to be really paying attention to all those same things we've been talking about. But let me show you what I'm going to do in the apricot tree. The main thing I want to do for this apricot tree, because it's so big, I'm not going to be overly concerned about shortening those long branches that are, 15, 20 feet in the air. But you can see on the lower right-hand side, I've got some branches dragging on the ground. We had some really heavy rains this spring, so I'm actually going to go ahead and cut those or shorten those so that I'm not having branches dragging on the ground all season long and just weighing the tree down. And the other thing I'm going to look for is I can tell that there are some places where little twigs and branches have broken because of their fruit load, and so I'm going to be removing all of that damaged growth and just looking out for places where I can thin things out, get rid of those water shoots, get rid of crossing branches, all that good stuff. So here are my dragging branches, and in case you're wondering what's going on over here, there was a massive pine tree over here that fell down in one of our really big spring rainy stretches, and so I still got a pile of ground up pine stump to spread around. Hey, it makes good mulch, but that's what's going on here. Well, I forgot to push record, but I just pruned my cherry tree here. And basically all I did was head off these longer leggy branches by a few leaf nodes. They were just growing really long and straggly, and it's the perfect time to do it because I could see at the end of each of the branches the leaves were really mature. So I know my tree has kind of slowed down and paused for the summer, and so I could control the shape. And so hopefully now all of these branches will grow nice and strong, and then they'll branch out once the tree starts growing again. Now, the other trees that really benefit from summer pruning are apples and pears, especially if you're growing them as espalier. So let's head on over to my espalier apple trees. Up to now, I've talked about reasons that pruning in the summer can be helpful or why it might be a good idea. But for apple trees, specifically spur-bearing apple trees, which are the type that you would grow on espalier, it's essential. It's an essential part of fruiting and making sure you're having a really good crop. So in the winter time, I can prune these trees for just sort of general health, getting rid of damage, things like that. But summertime is when I can really shape them the way that I want. And when you're growing apple on espalier, same thing with pear, you really need to see how they're growing before you can influence the shape. So there are a couple of essentials. I've already pruned these and I have another video coming out where I talk a little bit more in depth how I'm pruning and training my espaliers. But just to kind of give you the general principle, the main thing you want to look for is, and this is true even if it's not an espalier, but again, let me reiterate, this is for spur-bearing apple trees, which is most apple trees. There are other varieties that will fruit on the tips of branches, and if you were to prune those off in the summer, you'd have no fruit next year. So don't do that. But for spur-bearing apple trees, you want to look for lateral shoots that are coming off of your main branches. So that's what this is right here. And what you want to do, this was probably about this tall before I pruned it. You want to prune them down to about 3 leaves above the bottom of the branch. So at the bottom of each branch is what's called a basal cluster of leaves. And it's this little grouping of 3, 4, 5 leaves that are all clustered together right at the bottom. But then you count up 3 leaf nodes and trim just above that. And what's going to happen is this will become a fruiting spur. And it won't take super long for this to become full of fruiting buds, and that's what's going to turn into your apples next year. Now I've only got a few of those lateral branches that I've trimmed down that are hopefully going to become fruiting spurs, but if you have a whole ton, you may want to thin them out so they're more evenly spaced along the branch. This tree is really young still, so I don't have to worry about that a lot. But that's the basic idea of how you want to summer prune your apple trees. I have other fruit trees, and for the most part I just leave them alone in the summer because they don't grow as vigorously as the ones I showed you, so they don't need quite as much taming. So for example, I have some citrus trees, a persimmon tree, I have a pomegranate tree over here, and then behind me this fig tree. Generally, I leave them alone, but one caveat to that is I'm always looking out for any spots where I see damage or disease coming in, and I'll go ahead and trim those off any time. The tree will be more stressed by a damaged branch hanging off and disease and pests potentially getting in than it will be by me removing just a twig or a small branch or something like that. The other thing I'm always looking for is root suckers. Most of these trees, that's not a problem, but except for the pomegranate tree, I'll often go out and thin out root suckers and shoots that are coming from the bottom of the tree and just kind of crowding it. But other than that, I leave them alone. And this goes back to kind of the whole theme with summer pruning, and that is less is more. Know what you're trying to accomplish, know how you're trying to influence the tree to grow or maybe slow down growing. And that is the key to summer pruning. So let me know in the comments, have you tried pruning your fruit trees in summer? Do you notice that it makes a difference? In any case, I really hope that this video is helpful to you. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.